Well, this is week 47 of our 2019 adventure, and in this episode, I'm going to share my couple days of falling down the rabbit hole, how I feel about allowing ourselves to do this occasionally, the importance of coming back out, and to not get stuck down there. Welcome to Harmony Enterprises. I'm your host, Carrie Fox, and in this episode, we're going to talk about looking at those times when you fall into the darkness or sadness or maybe just lose confidence. It's a mini dark night of the soul. And not only why it's so important to keep your visit short, but also how to do that and rise back up into the light. But first, a reminder to live in harmony with the infinite wisdom that dreamed you into being. Which means that when you are able to look at the world from that point of view, you are also able to see how you can get back up after being knocked down. So what happened to me a couple days ago was a feeling of the rug just being pulled out from under me. Now I have to admit I did get some news that caused a momentary panic reaction that I was able to shift out of almost immediately because I was going to be in public. So I had to set that bad news aside. But the next day, I needed to revisit the bad news because it did need to be dealt with. A few hours later, I felt a panic rising up inside of me, that anxiety, and I just couldn't get it under control. Now listen, I work in the field of personal growth and higher power, so I have a lot of tools in my toolbox. But it was like I couldn't even lift the lid, as I could feel myself sliding down that slippery slope into the fear and the darkness. I tried to think what could be causing this reaction inside of me. And then I remembered, check your biorhythms. So I know that I've shared a lot of information through posts and workshops about biorhythms, but let me just recap a little here about biorhythms, which are the energies related to your 3D physical body. It's a huge part of your being a human being. Now, one of these energies is your emotional flow, shown on this graph as the red line. And looking just at the red line, you can see that it goes up and it goes down, it goes back up, it peaks, it goes back down, it hits bottom, and it starts back up again. And there are two other energies that flow and that are commonly measured, but for this episode, I'm just referencing the red line, the emotional rhythms. So in a typical biorhythm chart, there is a theoretical midpoint line that runs horizontally here. And when all other things that could be happening in your life are good, like your job and your relationships and your health and astrological influences, then the only day or days on a typical chart that these energies might be a little iffy is the day that your emotional energies cross that imaginary horizontal line. So on this graph, that would be here on day 14, where it's passing from above the line to below the line, and then again on day 28, when it's moving from below the line to above the line. Now, these days are commonly called critical days, the day your energy flow crosses that center line. And again, we're only talking about emotions here. Those days when they cross the line are typically the days when your feelings might get hurt over a little nothing that somebody might say. So this is my chart for that date. And please note not only the horizontal line, but also that there's a dark vertical line running down the center. And this line is the day that I was referencing the chart. You can see that that day was not a crossing critical line. But where my emotions were is they're way down at the bottom of the chart. So my emotions were in the pits. Now that's a little odd that just on its own that could be causing my panicky, anxious feelings. But then look at this. This is the blue line. That's also my physical line. Here's that day. And right around that day, both my physical and my emotional rhythms were down in the pits. So that's a little more interesting and might also explain my feelings and emotions. But then could there be something else? Well, astrologically, as many of you may know, Mercury has been retrograde and it would be going direct in a couple of days. So energy-wise, the influence of Mercury literally has its brakes on tight. So, okay, I got it. I was weak. I could feel the tears right behind my eyelids, that hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach of maybe the dawning of despair. Basically, I was weak, I was vulnerable, and to add to that list, I've been burning the midnight oil, spending 16, 17 hours a day working on a couple of big projects. I needed a break. Now there is no doubt about it. So I'm lucky enough to do most of my work from home and I make my own schedule, which by the way means when you're an entrepreneur that my workaholic tendencies set in, and there's no such things as weekends like people who work a 9-to-5 job on Monday through Friday. I usually dive headfirst into my projects. And so yeah, I was burnt out, I needed a break, I was fragile, and I had low resistance. So I finished what I was working on, or I got it close enough so that I could close it down. I checked my emails for anything important. I made sure the cats had food, and I curled up on the couch with soft music and a good book. Well, that's not really the truth. That would be a cool scenario. But I'm a movie buff. I love movies. So I curled up on the couch and I watched a tearjerker and I let myself cry it all out. I did fall asleep and later I did move into the bedroom. Now the next morning, I did something I pretty much never do. When I woke up, I did a quick bathroom trip, fed the cats, and went back to bed, where I stayed all day. I slept off and on, I read some, I wrote some, I watched another movie. And in a 35-hour period, I was on the couch or in the bed for over 30 hours, and I got more sleep than I normally get in a week. I obviously needed it. Now on the second morning, I woke up early as I normally do, about 4 a.m., and instead of rolling over to go back to sleep as I did the day before, I was ready to get up and step back into my wonderful life. I felt great. I got up, I fed the cats, I made a cup of hot lemon water, and I happily settled into my normal morning routine of a 2-hour meditation session. It was wonderful, and I was back in sync with me. I was back in the flow, in harmony with nature and my higher consciousness. So the moral of this story is that there is nothing wrong with feeling low, flat, or empty. These states are actually soul nudges, invitations to listen to ourselves more deeply, to love ourselves more authentically, to pay attention to the magic in between these things. I've learned that sometimes you just have to give yourself permission to go to bed, especially when I can see the reason for my particular out-of-sortedness was my biorhythms and astrological influence. I knew all would be better in a day or two, so I gave myself permission to give in. Now, it's not selfish to love yourself, to take care of yourself, to make your happiness a priority. It's a necessity. And it is so important to love someone, including yourself, a little extra on their bad days. And it's not always the size of the problems that cause suffering, it's how long and how tight you cling to them. And then to put a dot on the end of this episode is the how to step back into being your best self, having purpose, moving forward in your mission. I have to say that the number one thing is developing a meditation practice. Without a doubt, the easiest and best way to get back on and stay in and live in harmony with the infinite wisdom that dreamed you into being is having a daily meditation practice. Now, if you'd like a free copy of the Feel Loved and Nurtured and Supported ebook, you can request your copy by sending an email to feellovedbook@harmonyenterprises.net. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on this week 47 episode about falling down the rabbit hole. I hope something we talked about today inspires you to have a clearer view about when you might have challenges as I did this week. And I'd love to hear if you have any takeaways from this episode. Feel free to comment or to message me. And basically, I'm just so glad we spent this time together.